You know, they always say that history is written by the victors, but what if the real story is hiding in plain sight? What if it's in the echo of an ancient name, or etched onto a clay tablet that's been buried for thousands of years? Today, we're going to take a journey, a deep dive into the corridors of theology. We're going from the dusty lands of Canaan all the way to the massive ziggurats of Mesopotamia, and we're going to uncover an incredible story of divine rivalry and what looks a lot like cosmic theft.
So, in most sacred texts, the story is pretty clear, right? Baal is the false idol, the bad guy who needs to be defeated. And Yahweh? Well, he's the one, the absolute, the unrivaled God. But what if that's not the whole story? What if these two weren't just ancient enemies, but were actually rivals, competing for the exact same titles, the same powers, and maybe even the same throne up in the heavens?
So, where do we even start? Well, our investigation begins with some pretty solid, tangible evidence. We're talking about archaeological discoveries that really blur the lines between these two gods. And what they suggest is, wow, nothing less than a deliberate, calculated transfer of cosmic power. To really get a grip on this, you have to look at the timeline. So, back in the 14th century BCE, we have these cuneiform tablets from the ancient city of Ugarit, and they paint the super clear picture of Baal as this mighty god of storms and fertility. Fast forward a few centuries while the Hebrew Bible is being put together, and guess what? Those exact same attributes, almost word for word, are systematically given to Yahweh. But the real key, the Rosetta Stone for this whole mystery, didn't show up until 1929. That's when the Ugarit library was rediscovered, and suddenly scholars could see these incredible parallels, side by side for the first time in thousands of years.
And this is where it gets really wild. Look at how direct these comparisons are. I mean, this isn't subtle at all. In the Ugaritic texts, they call Baal Alyan Baal, which means the Mighty One. In the Bible, Yahweh is called El Shaddai, God Almighty. Okay, pretty close. But it gets even more specific. Baal is famously known as the rider of the clouds. Then you open up Psalm 104, and it says Yahweh makes the clouds his chariot. The voice of Baal is the thunder. And Psalm 29, the voice of the Lord is over the waters, the God of glory thunders. It's almost a carbon copy.
So here's the kicker. The ancient Israelites weren't just borrowing some cool poetic language. No way. This was a deliberate, theological power move. It was them declaring to the entire ancient world, hey, you know all those powers that used to belong to Baal, the control over storms, the rain, life itself? Yeah, that all belongs to Yahweh now. It was basically a hostile takeover on a cosmic scale. And that brings up a really important question, doesn't it? Why are these incredible similarities so often just overlooked or even hidden? I mean, this points to a much more complex story about how beliefs evolve. To answer that, we have to go deeper. We have to look beyond just a simple rivalry and dig into the very structure of the divine family tree. See, to really understand how Yahweh rose to the top, we have to look at the council he came from. And this is where we run into a word that unlocks a much deeper, kind of esoteric mystery. That word is Elohim. Okay, so in the bigger Canaanite pantheon, the big boss, the supreme god, was known as El. Now here's what's so fascinating. In the original Hebrew texts, the word we usually translate as God is Elohim. But here's the little linguistic secret nobody tells you in Sunday school. Elohim isn't singular, it's a plural noun. It literally means the gods, or the divine council, or even the children of El. Now that little linguistic fact, it blows the doors wide open to a staggering possibility. I mean, it challenges the whole foundation of monotheism as we know it. Could it be that Yahweh, in the very beginning, wasn't the one and only supreme being, but was just one member of a whole divine council, a pantheon ruled over by El? Well, there's a pretty radical answer to that question, and it comes from a bunch of mystical Christian texts that were basically hidden and suppressed for centuries. We're talking about the Gnostic scriptures, and they introduce this really fascinating and honestly kind of unsettling character called the demiurge. So according to these Gnostic teachings, the demiurge is the guy who built our physical world. But, and this is a huge but, he's not the ultimate true God. He's a lesser, kind of flawed creator. And he built a material reality that's basically a prison, a system designed to trap our divine spiritual sparks inside physical bodies. And here's the most shocking part of all. A lot of these Gnostic texts straight up identify this cosmic jailer, this flawed creator, with the jealous and angry God you read about in the Old Testament. This just forces you to stop and ask a really personal, really unsettling question. If titles like Storm God and Almighty can just be passed around, and if names like Yahweh and El are just part of this complicated divine soap opera, then what are they? Are they just masks? Masks for some deeper archetype of power? And if that's true, who or what have we been worshiping all this time?
And listen, this isn't just some dusty old history lesson. Because if gods can wear masks, you can bet the archetypes of power they represent can too. These patterns of control, they didn't just vanish, they just put on a new suit for the modern world.
Just think about it. Look at the ancient ziggurats in Mesopotamia. What were they? They were man-made mountains, basically stairways to heaven. They were built to inspire awe and to be the home for the power of the gods. Now look at the skyscrapers that dominate our cities today. They pierce the skyline, right? And they're designed to inspire awe too, but a different kind. The awe of corporate and financial power. One was the seat of the gods, the other is the seat of the modern elites. The function, it's shockingly similar.
So you see the point here. It doesn't matter if it's a temple priest demanding a tribute for Baal thousands of years ago, or a massive corporation shaping our world from a glass tower today. The basic archetype, that centralized, awe-inspiring power, it's still here. The only thing that's really changed are the names on the door. And this cycle just keeps repeating itself all through history. It's a four-step process, really. First, you establish an archetype of power, like controlling the weather, or information, or money. Second, you give it a name. Could be Baal, could be Yahweh, could be a global corporation. Third, you build rituals and giant structures to honor it, whether that's a temple or a corporate headquarters. And finally, you use that authority to control people, whether you call that authority divine or just economic. So this all leads us to one last big philosophical question. What if all these huge external powers aren't really external at all? What if the thunderous power of Baal and the absolute authority of Yahweh, what if they're just projections, external reflections of the creative and, destructive power that's sleeping inside every single one of us? Maybe that's the ultimate secret hidden in all these ancient stories. That real spiritual freedom isn't about picking the right god to worship on the outside. Maybe it's about reclaiming those powers we projected outward, the storm, the authority, the creativity. Maybe it's about finally awakening that divine spark that's already inside of us. Which leaves us with just one final thought to chew on. If the Gnostics were right, if this physical world is some kind of prison designed by a lesser god, then maybe the key to getting out isn't in some ancient book or a giant temple. Maybe the key to our liberation is found in the one place we rarely look, within the infinite, untapped potential of our own consciousness.